Hi, my name is Branda Stockman. I am the Executive Director of OST Training That Sticks and a National After School Matters Fellow through the National Institute on Out of School Time with the Wellesley Centers for Women. I'm really excited to talk to you today about this. I know that there are a lot of people that are kind of in the middle of summer program and are really looking for some quick ideas on how to deal with various issues that are coming up in program. And we're going to be talking about behavior management specifically. And I'm going to introduce to you a training model that you can use in summer programs that takes a really short amount of time that hopefully will have a big impact. I want to note that I'm using the term behavior management, but that's probably not the best practice. That's not exactly what we're talking about here. We're not talking about people just managing kids in the classroom. We're talking about guiding positive behaviors and staff really being able to instill skills in youth that they're going to be able to use moving forwards. So when you're looking for ideas in this area, you're going to Google behavior management, and that's really the term that we use in general. And so that's why behavior management is there, even though we're referring to guiding positive behaviors. I have worked with youth and families for almost 25 years now, and this is a topic that has come up over and over and over again in programs where staff are kind of struggling in managing behaviors, and it makes a really big impact in program quality and youth outcomes and job satisfaction. And we're going to talk through that today. So just a little bit of an overview. There was a bunch of research that went into this model, looking at OST research, at education, youth development, health, and this was all developed in collaboration with NIOST, the National Institute on Out of School Time. So let's talk specifically about behavior management. This is incredibly difficult to teach staff, and this is something you've probably experienced. I've seen it so many times where, you know, when a staff starts with you, maybe you give them an introduction and it's kind of like a behavior management 101, but it doesn't cover every single thing that comes up in program. It is very hard for staff to kind of absorb all that information all at once. And really, you can't cover absolutely everything that's going to happen in program. So, you know, the idea of really teaching this to staff can be intimidating and really hard. There's also really limited resources out there for training in this area. And something that I found in my research was that even teachers who do this all day, every day, have really limited training in this area. There was a study that was done of teachers across the country, new teachers who left the field within the first 5 years, which is a big deal, because these are people who have invested so much time and energy and money and all of these things into this career, and then they leave. And it was found that the number one reason why they left the field was because they didn't feel equipped to manage classroom behaviors. So I think that really leads me into my belief that managing behaviors or guiding positive behaviors is arguably the most important part of any OST staff member's job. When you have a staff that's coming to work every day and the kids are arguing and they're not listening to the staff, maybe they're being disrespectful to them, the staff can't get the kids to do activities, it's a mess, there's arguing and fighting, the staff are not going to go home at night and be like, wow, I love my job and I can't wait to do this again, right? So staff having the skills to be able to really create positive environments in programs is going to allow them to have greater job satisfaction. It's going to increase positive outcomes for youth, and it's really going to keep staff at work. And all of us know kind of the negative impacts of turnover. So, you know, really having skills in this area can really mitigate some of those factors that do lead to turnover in the future. So let's talk about the Training That Sticks model. This is a model that's usually meant to be introduced to staff in their staff meetings that happen weekly. I know we're talking about summer programs now, and so maybe you have daily meetings in your program or a couple times a week. And so the idea would be that this is brought up in the staff meeting and that there's about a 15 to 30-minute discussion. Behavior management in this system is broken down to very tiny bite-sized pieces. And so in the curriculum set, you would have the option to choose from a number of cards that could be addressing issues that you're specifically seeing at that time in your program. So the concept would be introduced to the staff, and we'll go through the cards in a minute. And it goes over exactly what the topic is, what specifically are we talking about. And then there's some teach steps. And so some ideas on how you address that specific topic. Then there's discussion questions. And so for staff to really actively get involved in the training process, which we know is what leads to lasting skill development. There's discussion questions, there's role plays, there's opportunities for staff to reflect on themselves and their experience. And then there's some tips. And so some ideas to keep in mind when working with those topics. And so then the idea is the discussion would end. And so again, just a few minutes going through these things. And then over the next few days, the supervisor would do observations. And so they'd really think about focusing on the concept that has been reviewed and providing staff feedback and doing goal setting and observations and everything related to that specific topic. And then a few days later, the group comes back together in their next staff meeting, talks about how it went, reflects on that, and figures out if there's anything they want to do differently moving forward. So when you sign up for this webinar, you should have received a sample set of curriculum cards. And we're going to go through a bunch of those so you can see what this looks like in action. You can print these out for yourself to be able to use with your staff teams. So the first one, behavior management systems. Having a system in place in your program is crucial when it comes to recognizing positive behaviors and also providing structure for negative behaviors that might come up in your program. When you're working with staff, especially in summer programs, when you have a really limited amount of time with them, it is a really beneficial thing for staff to be able to have a structure to fall back on when it comes to how they should be kind of running things in their groups. So this is telling staff that systems are important, and having systems that address both positive and negative behaviors is important. This talks about there being many schools of thought when it comes to what systems look like. I've definitely heard from a lot of people, things like, why I don't want to bribe kids for good behavior. Why would I do that? They should just behave well on their own. Like, they're not always going to be given rewards for things. So why would I be doing that? Which is a great point. But a lot of these cards really ask staff to reflect on themselves and their experience and what works for them. So for example, if somebody sends you a survey, and let's say maybe you don't know them very well, and the survey's on something that the results don't really have an impact on you, it doesn't really matter to you, and they say, please, this means a lot to me, can you fill it out by next week? Are you going to fill out that survey? I think the answer is maybe, right? Kind of depending on your time and depending on lots of things. But if they say to you, if you fill out the survey, you're going to get a $20 gift card, you're probably going to fill out the survey, right? So, while it is fair that you shouldn't be purely motivated by external rewards, this is something that works with adults, and it is proven to be something that can help reinforce those positive behaviors with youth as they're developing. This also asks staff to reflect on other systems that would work for them or would not work for them. So something that I see sometimes used in classrooms is a clip chart. And a clip chart is every kid has a little clothespin with their name written on it. And there's a chart on the wall, and there's different colors. And it goes from green, which is like, wow, like amazing, to like yellow or red or purple, which is like, whoa, like that was the worst. And kids start on green every day. And as the day goes on, if there are problems that come up, the teacher says to them, you go ahead and you need to clip yourself down for today. You're going to be on yellow. And the kid goes in front of the whole class and clips himself down. And so this is asking staff to think about systems like that and if that would work for you. So, if you had a clip chart in your office and every day your supervisor decided if you did a great job that day or if you did not, and they clipped your chart accordingly, and all of the staff at the end of the day could see who was doing good and who was struggling, right? Probably not something you'd respond really well to, might create feelings of anxiety, and I don't know, just really think about that. And this talks about when you're creating systems, that it's important to have various ways for kids to earn something. And so if a kid, let's say, comes to program every day and they get a star every day, and at the end of the week, if they get 4 stars, then they get a prize. Problem with that is that if a kid comes in and let's say they have had a really hard time at school that day and are really struggling, they come in and somebody bumps into them and they flip out. They yell at the kid, they throw their backpack on the ground, and they've done things that have violated the rules and that do not earn them a star for the day. And if you say to that kid, you lost your star for today, they don't have really that much motivation to be able to turn things around and move on with their day. So this is saying that it's important for kids to have multiple ways to earn things during the day to keep their behavior on track. So, you know, getting a star for signing in, because everybody can sign their name in every day, you know, and then getting a star for being respectful or whatever. So the teach steps here, and this is when the supervisor would go through these as a way to talk to staff about what to think about when they're making their own systems. So is the system simple and developmentally appropriate? Systems can work for any age youth. It doesn't matter if they are in 12th grade, like I gave you the example of an adult with the gift cards. These are things that work if you adapt it to the age group that you're working with and the specific needs of the youth, right? With little kids, you'll want to kind of make the system for them, but for older kids, you want their buy-in in the process. The second one is it visual? So there needs to be some way for kids to keep track of how they're doing. So, you know, for older kids, do they get stars on a poster board that's displayed in the corner where kids are earning stars? It doesn't show when they're struggling or having a bad day, but something that they can see. For little kids, do they have their own personal little chart that has a smiley face for respect, or like a book picture for doing their homework? Visual systems are really important, especially for younger kids and working with youth that are on the spectrum, for example. Is it doable? So are you implementing something that you're going to be able to do every single day? Do you have kids earning 12 stickers a day? And at the end of the day, you've got 30 kids. And so whatever 12 times 30 is, you're going through massive amounts of stickers, putting them on there, squeezing them in, making sure there's enough space. And, oh, do we have enough stickers? I just ran out. We have to go shopping for tomorrow. You know, is that going to be doable? Are you going to be able to use a punch card, you know, a hole punch? Are you going to be able to punch? Is your hand going to handle punching 300 punches every day? I can tell you from experience, the answer is no. So really thinking through if the system is going to be workable in your program. And then, like I mentioned before, is there still an option for kids to recover after they've had a slip? So after this discussion happens with the staff, then you would move on to the discussion questions. And so really involving them in the training process by asking them to think about themselves. And so to reflect on what might make somebody feel appreciated and motivated at work. And then how do you take those things and implement them into the work that they're doing with youth? And then it has staff really think about behavior management systems that they have witnessed. And so this could be in work, or maybe when they were kids, there was something their teacher used in their classroom. And what do you think about that? You know, what are your takeaways? And then there's an instruction here for staff to then brainstorm together what kind of system they want to use for their program. Staff would then go over the tips. And so the first one is talking about systems that involve giving and taking things away. Like, do you really want to do that? You know, I've seen an example where a staff member gave a youth a stamp for something during the day and then decided that they were going to take that stamp away. And so they like ripped it out of the notebook that it was in. Do you want to do that? Do you want to risk initiating a power struggle, or, you know, getting into a kid's face, maybe activating past traumas by taking something away from them? Think about that. There's some tips about what to do if you share a space and you don't have access to like post things all the time, or just thinking about some ideas on if you have a tight budget. So then, again, the discussion would end after the staff meeting, and for the next few days, the supervisor would observe the staff, provide some feedback, and then get ready in a few days to come back and kind of revisit the topic. So these questions on here are asking, you know, how did it go? How did you talk to the kids about the system? Was there any challenges that came up? Is there anything that the kids asked about the system, or anything that you didn't understand that you want more clarification on? And are there ways the system needs to be modified? So definitely creating a system and sticking to it is very important, especially if you implement this during your program and not at the beginning, because it'll take a while for kids to really get into it and get bought in, or it could. You know, still sticking to the plan, but also having that flexibility to modify parts of it that aren't working. So here's another example. This is in your set, and this is a specific behavior issue that you might see in your program, which is interruptions. And when I ask you, like, what is the biggest problem you have in your program? What is a big behavior that keeps coming up that you're really struggling with and that your staff really need help with? You're probably not going to say interruptions, right? Probably have much bigger things going on in program. But I want to give you an example of how not being able to deal with these smaller issues can really result in big issues in program. So an example, you have a staff member, a group leader, who's leading a lesson on astronomy, and they're very excited about it. They go through the entire lesson, and then they've gotten to the steps, the instructions for the activity. And so they're talking about that, and there's a little girl who puts up her hand. She's like, Miss, I'm wondering if there's a time, and the group leader's like, okay, Georgia, thank you so much. I would love to answer your question, but let's hang on to it for a minute until the end, because I might answer your question when I'm giving all of these instructions. And so she's like, okay. So the staff moves on. They keep explaining, and then little Georgia puts up her hand again. Miss, my grandma told me one time that I could, and they're like, okay, Georgia, remember, we just talked about this. I need you to hold on to your questions until the end, and then we can get to it. We really need to be quiet because we're wasting time here. We want to make sure you have enough time for everybody to do their work. So she's like, okay. So the staff starts talking again, and there's Georgia again, Miss. And the staff member is like, that's it, Georgia. I have told you 3 times now that we cannot be interrupting. You need to save your questions from the end. And now, we're wasting time. Nobody can do their work because we're waiting on you. You need to go and sit in the corner and think about what you did. And so Georgia's like, I don't want to sit in the corner. Georgia, I told you need to go sit in the corner. But I just want it. Georgia, that's it. If you do not go sit in the corner, I'm going to call your parents. And then Georgia has a complete meltdown on the floor, right in the middle of the group. And so maybe as the director, you're in the hallway and you hear this happening, or maybe it's one of your staff that hears this happening. And they go into the room because they're like, wow, like there's a lot of crying. And they pull the group leader aside and they're like, what happened? And the group leader's like, you have to call her parents because, she got in trouble. And so you're like, oh, like, why? Why did she get in trouble? What happened? And they're like, because she was interrupting. And you're like, ooh. What parent wants to get a call home, like, during the workday, probably saying that your kid's in trouble, you need to pick them up, or they need to have consequences because they were interrupting. And I think this is a really good example of how staff can have such a significant impact on the behaviors that are coming up in program. This wasn't an issue necessarily of the kid interrupting and that being such a big problem. The problem was the staff's reaction to the interrupting and their inability to kind of put things in place to prevent that from happening to begin with. So on this card, under concept, this recognizes that being interrupted can be frustrating. We're people, we have feelings, and it's hard when you're trying to teach something and kids keep interrupting you. Then it adds a why. So understanding the why behind behaviors is crucial when it comes to addressing that behavior properly. And this is saying that sometimes youth might be so excited about what you're saying, they just have to let something out. Or that maybe they're having an emotional response to something that you've said that they want to express. And then there's an idea, like, what do you do to deal with this? And so this is talking about teaching calming strategies or mindfulness exercises in order to help kids kind of contain that and hold on to those things instead of interrupting. So then the teach steps. On this card, this is talking about doing these things in a time when the interrupting is not happening. So this doesn't happen like when George is about to have a meltdown, like we don't interrupt and like go through and do a role play on why you shouldn't interrupt. This is meant to be done maybe the next day if this is seen as being a significant issue. And so the first step is doing a role play. So having the kids actively involved in role playing. And this can look different if there's younger kids or older kids, but the general idea is just a role play. Then you ask the group to talk about what they noticed about the role play. You ask the kids that were involved in role playing themselves what their feelings were, how did it feel to be interrupted? And then you ask the whole group, why might the interrupting have been happening and what are some ways that you can deal with it? And, when you're working with younger kids, you're going to want to come with examples because they might not know, because it's probably not a discussion they've had before. But with older kids, you can leave it pretty open and they can have that discussion themselves. So then with the staff, you move on to the discussion questions. And so this is asking staff, have you ever had a strong reaction when you were being interrupted? And to really reflect, how did that go? Did you respond positively? Is there something you would have done differently? Recognizing the person behind the staff figure. Then it asks them to brainstorm, again, some reasons why youth might interrupt, again, exploring that why behind the behavior. And then it asks staff to think about some of their own ideas about helping kids when interruptions are becoming an issue. So really recognizing that the teach steps are one way to deal with it, but maybe they've seen something different. Then some of the tips, there's some books that you could read with youth, and then there's some tips on if you're working with older kids and how that could look differently. So on this card in the review at the bottom, it feels like, it happens all the time where you're like, oh, we're going to focus on this thing because this is the thing that's a really big issue. But then you focus on it and then it doesn't come up, right? So something to think about is that when you have something that's been a pretty significant issue and then all of a sudden it's not anymore, there might be something that the staff has been doing to prevent that issue from coming up. And so this asks staff, if you did see it happening, to kind of reflect, how did it go? What would you do differently next time? But if it didn't come up, then what have you done that you think might have prevented those things from happening to begin with? Another card that you've got is a Pick Your Battles card. And this is something that really builds skills for staff that they can use in lots of behavior situations moving forward. So an example that I hear a lot of the times and that I've definitely seen with staff is, when staff focus on things like, look at me in the eye when I'm talking to you. That is respect. You're being disrespectful if you're not looking at me. And while maybe that is the way that they've been brought up and the way that they're, the adults in their lives felt like we're being respected, it's probably not the most developmentally or culturally appropriate thing to be insisting of in all youth. Another example is lines. And so having a group of kindergartners stand in line for 15 minutes while they're silent and not moving and hands behind their back and bubbles in their mouths. Lines are important, but is it worth spending 15 minutes and then you're late for dinner because you're spending so much time making sure that line is absolutely perfect? And maybe the answer is yes, but probably the answer is no. So this addresses the idea that it is a really fine balance between addressing every behavior versus addressing or ignoring some behaviors and making sure that you are not ignoring behaviors that contribute to an unsafe environment. So this talks about just how this comes with time. You really need to think through these behaviors, and with more experience, this will get easier. But in the meantime, the teach steps, because, again, we're talking about summer programs and you don't have weeks for staff to learn these things. It needs to happen pretty quickly. This is something that can be done as a discussion or as kind of a takeaway homework for staff to do if you have a really, really limited amount of time. So this is asking them to really think about their program's core values. And so those are probably things like respect and safety and responsibility. Then it asks them to brainstorm different behaviors that come up in programs. So what are the things that they see that they're addressing on a regular basis? And then compare those two lists. And so take a look at those things that are coming up and decide what are the things that are so closely related to the program's core values that they absolutely need to be addressed? And what are some other things that maybe don't need to be addressed every time? And then it asks staff to think about those behaviors that do need to be addressed and how do you address those things in a way that creates a positive and safe and supportive environment. And you don't want staff going around all day being like, no, stop that, don't do that, quiet, shh, we're gonna do something else, nope, oh, that doesn't look right, right? It's not fun. So how do you find that balance? So then the discussion, and so this is something if the staff do take that home to do kind of the homework on their own, they come back together, and this discussion is, what were your answers to the teach steps? Then it asks them to reflect, when is the time that you practice picking your battles and how did it go? And then can you think of a time when you didn't practice this? And I feel like this is pretty universal, where staff will have an example of this, especially at this point in summer program. So then there's some tips. And so it's talking about, if you have smaller issues that are becoming pervasive, so something like interruptions, then maybe focus on that issue for a few days or a week as a whole to kind of prevent future issues from coming up in that area. And then another tip about asking staff to observe them and give them feedback on how things are looking. Review questions, again, reflecting, have you been able to do this over the last few days? After you tried the strategies, is there something you would do differently? Or do you have any other ideas on how to deal with this? So this is the other card that you have. This is Loud Meltdowns. And we're not going to go through this in extreme detail because you can go through this with your staff. But I felt like this is an important one because, I think we're seeing a lot of behavior issues when it comes to a regular program that might not have been as big in the past. I think a lot of people are saying that kind of the lack of social interaction or the trauma that people have experienced over the last few years specifically has resulted in a lot bigger behaviors with youth I know also that there's a lot of refugees coming into our programs these days, and those are kids that are coming with a lot of trauma, and I'm just hearing all around that loud meltdowns are something that is really coming up a lot. And I feel like this is something like it never fails, where you're having a really important visit, and of course that is the day when there's a kid laying on the floor shouting, right in front of your funder or whoever, right? And so, this card again explores like, why might this behavior be happening? There's lots of different reasons. Probably the biggest reason is because you're working with kids and they don't necessarily have that emotional regulation that adults do. It also talks about how that could be a trauma response, and understanding that why behind the behavior, again, will help you figure out how to deal with that moving forward. And then normalizing it, loud meltdowns, it's something that kids do, and it's not, you don't have to stifle it and make them silent. Your funders and your, visitors are coming in and they understand that these are kids, and maybe they have kids, or maybe their friends do, or maybe they've been in a grocery store and they've seen this happen in the grocery store, right? So just understanding and putting everything into context. So the teach steps, just different things to do with it. And the main focus on this one is you're not going to start having a problem-solving discussion with a kid who's crying on the floor, right? You need to do some other things first to get them in a space where they're going to be able to have that conversation. Discussion questions, again, have you ever dealt with a situation like this? Have you seen somebody else deal with it? How did it go? What have you found to work well in the past? And what have you observed other people doing when situations like that come up that you think worked really well? Some tips, again, recognizing the trauma response, different ways to adjust your body and your interactions with the youth when you're trying to have discussions like this, and really focusing on empathy, and really, instead of, trying to make the kid be quiet, and to stop thinking and understanding that, like, wow, these are really big feelings right now, and I want to help the youth get through that. And then the review, again, some questions if it happened over the last few days or whatever, and if it didn't happen over the last few days. So those are all your cards that should be in your set. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope this was useful. Again, my name is Brenda Stockman. I'm with OST Training That Sticks. There is an entire curriculum that's based around many different behavior issues. If you're interested in that, you can find more information on my website at osttraining.com. My contact information is also there if you have some specific questions. Again, this is brought to you by the National Institute in Out of School Time through the Wellesley Centers for Women. And if you have any questions about the webinar series or anything in general, then please reach out to Georgia Hall at ghall@wellesley.edu. I hope you have a great summer, and I hope these resources are useful. Thank you so much.